Parent training. How do we plan for parent training? How do we support parents while they are getting interventions? What's amazing about the field of applied behavior analysis is that if your child is getting ABA, you are going to get some level of parent training. That is something that is really hard in the field of speech pathology. If I have a student that I see for speech therapy in a clinic or in their home, I will get to spend time with the parent to talk, to answer, to support. If I am seeing them in a school-based situation, that support is going to vary. I may see them just during IEP time, during progress reporting, during conferences, or there may be some parents I do not see that often. And it can be really a barrier in supporting parents. So today we are talking all about parent training. A lot of great information from my guest, Dr. Janie Funk. She is a PhD, BCBA-D, and she is the Director of Clinical Quality and Operations. We talk about a lot of great information around the ideas of parent training, how to support parents, how to work with students who have a dual diagnosis of mental health and needing ABA services. And she is offering a lot of really wonderful supports to parents. So if that is something you identify with, and those are your types of clients, you are going to want to tune in and listen to this episode. If you like this episode, make sure that you subscribe to the Autism Outreach podcast and leave me a review over on Apple Podcasts. That gives me great feedback and lets other people know that we are talking about important things over here. Let's get into our episode with Dr. Janie Funk.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the show. I am excited for this episode. We have with us Dr. Janie Funk. Thank you so much, Janie, for coming on to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you and get to share some virtual space with BCBA SLP. So cool. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I know we connected over on LinkedIn. I talk about social media a lot, but I'll tell you that LinkedIn is where I have met so many amazing BCBAs, and it all starts over on LinkedIn. So if you're listening and you're in the field and you're not on LinkedIn, I mean, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Get over there. So Janie, can you tell us, I always start with the first question because I always love to hear everybody's path to ABA. Matt Sikoria does that on Behavioral Observations, my friend. And I would love to hear how tell us a little bit about you, how you got into the field and what you're up to now.
Sure. So I'm a doctoral level behavior analyst. I specialize in dual diagnoses, so intellectual developmental disabilities and mental health conditions, and systems analysis. So right now I'm working in Nebraska with Behaven Kids, directing their clinical quality and compliance. We're a growing program, been established for some time, upwards of 10 years, just the ABA specifically. So lots of systems work, super fun, strong focus on quality and compliance. Really all of my favorite things. I feel super fortunate. And I got into the field of behavioral health as a tech providing mental health services to youth. And I would do that as a summer job in high school and when I moved back home during undergrad summertime. So that was my entry point. And my undergrad was in developmental psych, and that's where I was first exposed to learning theory, including behavior analysis. And I just felt really drawn to it, felt really familiar to me to have more of a contextual behavioral worldview. I think that I came to the classes with that already and learned a lot about what that meant in my interpretation of the world and how we engage with it. So I ended up going to University of Nevada, Reno for both my master's and doctoral degrees. I had intensive clinical supervision and training by psychologists. Obviously fieldwork was with a qualified supervisor, but I was
following all the rules. She follows all the rules.
All the rules.
No,
yeah,
the BACB is listening. No, I know.
Yes. Just to be clear, very compliant.
Just to be clear. Yes. No, I got you.
Yeah, but my training was I feel so fortunate for my training in the clinical work that I did because of my engagement with psychologists, clinical psychologists, and I worked in the Nevada Aging and Disability Services Division. So I was able to really learn how to provide quality care to the dually diagnosed population in a really complex government system of care with limited resources.
Wow.
And that intersect is what I'm most passionate about. And yeah, I feel really fortunate I can do a lot of that work with Behaven right now. So that's a little bit of my story.
Well, that's neat. So the clinic that you're at now, are there are there various locations, or is there one location, or what does that? I'm always fascinated. I talk to people in my membership, and it's just amazing. Like some people are like, oh yeah, I have 17 BCBAs. And another person was like, we have 300 speech therapists. I'm like, oh my goodness, I know. I'm like, oh my goodness. That's a lot. Okay. That's a lot. So how many locations, or what does that look like?
For us, it looks like right now providing services in 4 different locations. And we span about 75 miles eastern Nebraska. It's all clinic-based services. I have 11 BCBAs and about 50 frontline staff, BTs or RBTs, and then the more admin leadership kind of roles. So we're growing a lot. It's about triple of the end of 2022.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of hard work and a lot of fun, and we're able to impact a lot of the families and youth in Nebraska. Certainly not to 300 SLP kind of scale, but goals.
Yes, goals, life goal. I was like, oh my gosh, I need a nap. I need to sit down. I need to lay down. I thought I did a lot last week. I got a booth and did a talk at a convention, but no, it's amazing. I love to hear about all the different, everybody is in a different groove with what they're doing. So tell me, it sounds like you're supporting people in that area. How do you provide support to parents? What are ways that you provide support to parents?
Oh, it's such a good question. This is something we're constantly working with, trying to refine, adapt. There are a lot of demographic considerations where services need to be adjusted to be good clinical services. So always on our mind, always on the table for working through. So we do provide ABA services to youth that are funded by insurance companies. So we end up providing support to families in a variety of ways. But one component of the support we do provide is mandated by the payers. So this is, one of the instances where the compliance component really speaks to and facilitates some of the quality in certain ways, is a safeguard of sorts built in requirement. But the caregiver engagement and their support is so impactful to the overall success for the child. It truly does need to be a emphasized and prioritized component of the services. So we do that from a variety of other ways, in addition to what is required. But how I conceptualize it is building a strong team of clinicians who have great clinical and interpersonal skill sets, and providing professional development and supports around building those skill sets as well. We have referrals, always important to have a good network for referrals if needed. So they can get access to services and we can collaborate with other kinds of providers. We have flexibility with some scheduling. We've offered evening and weekend sessions for families. We've facilitated medical transport for those who have transportation issues. Strong operational procedures are really important too. I think maybe underemphasized as far as the impact of the support provided to families. So just, ensuring you have systems in place that facilitate caregiver questions and concerns and support needs being addressed in a timely manner and being proactive and effective with that. So try and approach the support from a bunch of different directions.
Yeah. And I think that's important, especially if you have a practice that's growing that is maybe owned by a private provider. Like, I don't want to say a mom and pop shop, but sometimes that's what it's considered on LinkedIn. People will say that on social media, like it's a real person who started a company, who's growing a company. Sometimes I think it's hard for those people. I always talk about it from an ethical lens because I teach the ethics course here at Kent State and have for 5 years. But I'm like, it should be in the book. Before it was the $10 rule, like there's this rule in the guidebook where you could not get any kind of gift before. People were arguing over with water was a gift, or you could use the restroom at a client's house and all these silly things that we talk about as BCBAs. Now it's $10 and people talk about that. But I always go back to, if you're working for a company that's thinking about their operations, that's thinking about the supports that staff need and that parents need, it should all be in the handbook. It should all be in the parent handbook. It should be in the staff handbook. Easy for me. I don't own a company, ABA company, but I do know that ethically, to have staff feel supported and for parents to know what's going on, it should always be something like we go over it and then we can refer back to it. It's not something that's brand new when somebody gives you $100 spa gift card or something, and then you make somebody feel bad. That's just one example. But so it sounds like you have a good you have a lot of good things into place. So with the parent training, is that dictated by, I know the frequency, is that dictated by the insurer? So it's speech language pathologists, because I'm both, we don't have any of that parent training as a requirement. I do think that's what's really amazing about ABA, because it's nice to build that ongoing communication and support with parents. Is it based on the insurance where there's like a minimum of like, you do have to do parent training once a month, and then it's up to the clinic's discretion to say like, yes, we'll do it once a month, or no, we're going to do it twice a month, or how does that work?
That's such a great question. And it's certainly a consideration that's important for businesses and programs that are providing these kind of services and working with payers. There's, I don't work with all of the payers. So for example, TRICARE, which is known to have really stringent requirements, we don't work with them at the time. So I can't speak to every payer, but for us, my experience with the payers and their guidelines and expectations around parent engagement is that it's important, it's expected, and there's not necessarily a quantifiable minimum that I have come into contact and gotten the payer to state. On the other hand, there are, for those who do bill for services in this kind of way, there's always a 97156 expectation. Like you request that, and there's a portion, generally all of it is approved. And then the payers expect you to speak to your parent engagement. And in fact, there's more and more push for titration of services and discharge planning from the onset of service provision. So at intake, that's one of the things that's in your parent handbook, and then the staff handbook, your clinical standards, where you speak to the overall long-term goal of addressing acquisition and behavior supports to the extent that ABA services are provided. And so every single authorization period, you're expected to speak to parent engagement, how you're setting them up to be able to support the child in the home, in the community, collaborate with the school as relevant, so that there can be a presumed more successful transition out of the ABA services. So I've heard a lot about that lately from the payers, but maybe somebody else has more success than I do to get them to say hard and fast, here's the rule.
Right. It is nice. Like as a speech therapist, we don't get, it's not really kind of mandated. It's not something that's discussed, So if I'm a clinical SLP and I see a client, I'm probably going to be able to talk to the parent right after the session because that's good. Or maybe the parent sits in the session if the child is younger. But if you're working in a school, you have some parents you might have a lot of ongoing communication with, and then you might have some that you never actually even meet during the course of the year, or it could just be this continuum, and every single parent is going to be different. But I do think that's what's nice about ABA services, because it is a team. And I do like that idea of thinking about what systems are in place. And I mean, I know that I've met parents because we have a membership called the ABA Speech Connection for professionals and parents. And I can tell the parents that are like, have a child who's newly diagnosed and kind of what services and supports they need versus somebody who has an adult son who's, uses an AAC device. It's like they understand a lot of that early stuff. They just want to talk about like the ongoing communication, the ongoing support. So you probably see that kind of with your parents as well, the different needs and supports. And I'm thinking back, I've been dually certified for 12 years. I've been in the field for 20. I don't know if I took a very specific course on parent training. I don't think that I did. We talk about in our field behavioral skills training, the 4-pronged approach, and we've done CEUs on that. And that's kind of the basis when I'm working with parents that I try to teach from. But I didn't have a course on parent training. Do you find that new BCBAs to the field, that's something that they kind of struggle with as far as how to set that up and what that might look like? You probably have an internal kind of organization and guidance, but.
We do, but it's really because we saw a need for it. I haven't had any BCBA come to our group with formal training on parent engagement and caregiver engagement within their master's program. Maybe could be addressed within maybe a consulting class, but not specifically. How are you engaging with parents? What are the interpersonal skills that are needed? From my perspective, my viewpoint, looking in from afar, it seems like there are a handful of programs that are really emphasizing that more nowadays, with like compassionate care emphasis. For example, a lot of work out of Mary Jane Weiss's lab comes to mind. A lot of work out of UNT with engagement.
Yeah, we had Chalet, I think that's her name. I can't think of yes, and a parent, they wrote this book together. They came on, and then I had Dr. Jessica Rohr, I think is her name. I'm sorry if I'm making that wrong, but she talked about she has an article, I'm pretty sure, along those same lines. And she's been on the podcast. But yeah, I do think that's important, because I remember going to home visits when I worked at the Cleveland Clinic, and it wasn't that I wasn't compassionate and I didn't care, but we were just kind of winging it. We were just trying to support the parents and see how the kid was in the home environment. That was something we did these home visits way back in the day when that program started. And I think that there's something to be said, especially for a long time ago, where, there weren't podcasts, there weren't memberships, there weren't things where people felt alone, I think, especially if you have a child whose behaviors are such that they're going to an outside placement, that can feel really isolating. Social media has changed that for the good and the worse. I don't know. But I think people feel less alone sometimes. But back then we were just trying to be like a support. So it's good that you've kind of shaped some of that up, because I think that you really don't get that guidance in speech therapy either. It's like, obviously we should be kind, and obviously we should be compassionate. But I like some of those articles. I talk about Dr. Marianne Jane Weiss. She has a really nice article on collaboration. And some of those things in the back are like seem very simplistic, but I try to think back to myself before I had kids, when I was like new to the field, and probably parents still make me nervous as a provider, but you just never know. Like, what are they really thinking? Are they really happy? Are they shopping around? Do they not like me? Are they going to tell my supervisor? I think you have a lot of thoughts in your head. So to have some kind of guidance for BCBAs to follow, I think is probably really helpful. Do you have a curriculum that you follow for parent training, or do you do a little bit of that? And then obviously it's student specific. What do you try to cover?
Yeah, great question. Everything's individualized, but at times we've used the Ruby curriculum
I've heard about
and have found that helpful. And then otherwise have more of an internal library of things that we might work on, but it
Mm-hmm.
is very individualized, and it's there's pros and cons to manualized work too, which we know it's like called clinical psych, because
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of work around manualized therapy and what that looks
Yeah.
like for a field and the communities. And we haven't used an ABA specific one like across the board. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing that I like. I'm trying to hold tight on for now
Mm-hmm.
as we scale, just allowing some clinical freedom. But
Yeah.
I think also important in our work with caregivers is, and the children, but certainly the caregivers as well, is the cultural competencies that we
Mm-hmm.
have too. And I more recently, that's also becoming integrated into master's programs. But
Mm-hmm.
when I I didn't get that. And I didn't feel like at the time when I was in grad school, it was really normal to get that. And it was really upon your supervisors, your fieldwork supervisors or mentors, what you were exposed to, what kind of behavior you're exposed to. So it's something that I think the field has acknowledged that we need more attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad to see that. And I hope that progress continues on the trajectory. So we engage with parents around a lot of difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
There's really always a support need, and we have to maintain our scope of practice. It's complicated. So I'm glad to see there's more work done in our field right now lately to be able to support us to engage more effectively.
Yeah, I do think, I was talking to somebody, I forget, but who's been in the field for a very long time. And they said, the conferences, like this person actually saw Skinner at a conference. And
So cool.
I know, I was like, oh dear. Okay. I saw Dr. Sundberg once, and I got to see Dr. Iwata back in the day. And, these were fangirl moments for me.
Right.
But this person did say, and they weren't like lamenting the fact, but they did say there is a major shift in the conferences now where to go to a speech therapy conference and go to an ABA conference is so different. And I'm sure with your background, you've been to probably different types of conferences, but a speech therapy conference might have, obviously we're going to talk about research, a little bit of data, and then it's going to be a lot of application. Sometimes when you go to an ABA conference, it can be really heavy on the data and maybe not as much about the application. It depends on the conference that you choose. But this person was saying like conferences are so different now because we are talking about these topics, like ACT or ASCENT or diversity and ableism and neurodiversity. And I think those you can see kind of a shift in the field that makes some people a little uncomfortable. But I do see that change. And I think that anytime our governing bodies say, I know with ASHA, which is our speech therapy organization, we have the ethics requirement, not as much as the BACB, and now we have a diversity recommendation that we have to do. I think anytime that happens, then people start creating information and we start finding those research articles that have been out there and they become more prominent and become more a part of our practice as they should be. So I think that is kind of interesting to see that shift. And I'm sure that then translates to your intervention and this training and parent training as well. So really quickly, I did want to talk about, because I know with your background in mental health, can you talk to us a little bit about maybe at your current setting, what you have in place for students who maybe have this dual diagnosis of autism and maybe a mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, so happy to talk about that. That was really one of the notable selling points for me for Behaven Kids, because we're actually comprised of 3 different programs. ABA is one. We have a specialized day program for kids who need more behavioral supports than what would be provided in a standard daycare setting, for example. And these kids often have some form of mental health diagnosis. And then we have outpatient mental health services. So we are working alongside an ample amount of professionals in the field of mental health to consult with as we need to, and regularly, actually, we engage with our licensed independent mental health practitioners, who are counselors and therapists on a monthly basis at minimum, to speak with them about our the kids in our ABA program and how we can ensure that there aren't any overlooked mental health concerns, that there's nothing we're doing from a behavior analytics standpoint that would be contraindicated from a mental health perspective, which I find is very important. And I love to see when behavior analysts get training on mental health and interventions and how our behavioral technologies can impact mental health. It's a little bit of a tangent, sorry. But yeah, we engage with them regularly and keep each other apprised and updated on best practices, trauma-informed environment for both our learners and their families, but also as a workplace is also important to us as well. So very proud to be a part of that. It's not necessarily the combination of services that we often see with ABA. You know, we actually don't have speech, we don't have OT, and while, you know, those are extremely important and valuable, I see less collaboration with mental health and ABA. So, you know, there's pros and cons to both, and we're working on adding other services too, but that's how we engage and stay, keep our eyes on the mental health aspect of the kids who we serve and their families too. You know, like we're not providing psychotherapy or anything like that. We stay within our scope of practice as behavior analysts, but it's always helpful to know what to look out for and when maybe a referral would be appropriate, and having a professional with that scope of practice available to consult with.
That's amazing. That's the definition of, that's it. I'm having all my ethics students in the fall listen to this podcast episode, because that is really all the things we're ethically called to do. But it's nice to talk about, because we know that there's a lot of providers out there that are not providing that level of service. One of my friends is owners in a really amazing practice here in Ohio, and there's 3 partners. One is a PhD level speech therapist, one is a neurologist, and one is a psychologist. And they have a day, they have a day program. They have outpatient services. They do have speech and OT and PT. And that all came with time. But I like the idea of those 3 working together because, we can't know everything. And how nice to be able to talk with somebody who is licensed in that area to do those case reviews. I do that sometimes with clinics. I provide consultations where they don't have a speech therapist. So I kind of help in that way, because it is nice, number one, to see like, oh, this person really specializes in this. And I can't know everything, but I can know somebody who does know about that. And I'm ethically called to make that consultation. So it sounds like you're doing amazing work. Where can listeners find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, I do have a tiny presence on LinkedIn too, and try to link whatever we're doing at Behaven Kids on there as well. But behavenkids.com is our site. We have a tab for resources for like general information geared towards practitioners and families about developmental disabilities and mental health in the youth population. And then we have a careers tab too, where you can see any of our job career opportunities that are available. So that's really the best landing page, with a great blog and a lot of nice features on that site. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend. And we're building our social media presence as well. So Instagram, Facebook, the basics.
All of them. I know them all very well, unfortunately. No, just kidding. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Rose. I love the work you do and appreciate being a part of your podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.